My name is Mathijs De Jonge. I'm a game director at Guerrilla.
What was your take of the games that were pitched? Was Horizon the one that sort of stood out to you? Did you see some other ones in there? Did you pitch anything yourself?
Yeah, Horizon, of all the concepts that were pitched, I think there was about 40 or something. Horizon was really standing out. I had some doubts about, it wasn't clear what the gameplay would be in that game. So that was hard for me to see. That I knew that was going to be a lot of work to figure that out, if we would select that pitch. But it had such cool elements in it, like the machines and the far future, the sci-fi setting and the machines and the tribes and that whole clash and the sense of danger in it. There were so many nice things in there. And it being an open world action RPG, that was also part of the pitch. That to me personally also had huge appeal, especially the open world, because as game designers, myself, I have a game design background. I always wanted, if we start a new project, I'm looking for new challenges, and this was a huge new challenge, obviously, coming from Killzone. Linear, more corridor shooter. Now suddenly we're going to make an open world game. So that was super interesting as a new challenge, and we can hire people, and we've done that. We've hired some people to bring in expertise, but to a large part you also want to self-discover this stuff, and you don't want people just telling you how to do it. Right. And then it being an action RPG was also very cool, because yeah, that's a genre I like personally as a gamer as well. Plus, again, new challenges for what kind of things can we come up with, and how do we design that, and lots of things to learn. Right. So that concept had most sort of connection points there. At the same time, it was by far the most risky one, because it was so different and so ambitious as well.
So how does that process of self-discovery work for someone in your position? Do you just sit down and play a lot of games? Do you look up GDC talks? Do you email people? Like how do you start to understand from a game director perspective how you start making an open world game?
Well, I play games from all genres, so racing games, shooters, sport games, and I've always done that. So I think somewhere I have you kind of feel what kind of works, and it doesn't matter what kind of game it is. Sometimes it can be a sports game that gives you an idea for something in your RPG, or vice versa. So inspiration comes from many places, I think. And what I always try to do here is to also look at our own prototypes and to learn from those. So with Horizon, when we started, we created small experiences, small playable experiences that allowed us to kind of create these moments, these encounters with machines through a bit of nature with a female character, and everything didn't look like it looks today when the game shipped, but at least you could see the potential and you could get a feel for it. And by playing this over and over and by adjusting things, you learn quite a lot. You learn about the density, you learn about the pacing, you learn about positioning, landscaping, many things you can learn from just playing your own prototypes, and that's an approach that I personally really like. Right. This is also something I always tell sort of the designers to look for options and to look for ideas that appear from playing your own prototypes, because that's where the more interesting stuff emerges, instead of playing other games and then basically copy pasting that into your game. So that is I think my main approach there. Yeah.
So can you explain to somebody who sort of may not know how the creative structure works here, what exactly a game director is responsible for, and also how you sort of sit with the other, I guess, two main creative leaders on this?
So as a game director, I'm mainly responsible for the overall vision of the game and sort of safeguarding that and making sure that the different teams know also get a sort of a high-level brief of which direction we should take something. So, for example, the music for the game that started with a very short one-page document describing the high-level vision for what the music style should be or could be. I discussed that with the audio guys, and then we tweaked that document until we're all happy with it, and then we started creating some pitches and some trials, etc. And but it starts with a high-level vision sort of idea in a document. So that's what I do for a lot of the different departments, and I work together, for example, with the writers on the first drafts of the story to make sure that the story is in the right direction, that fits with the overall game idea, that it connects well with the different gameplay ideas, etc. So I'm mostly in contact with the different heads of the different departments, right, to make sure that there's a good shared vision for the game that we're making. And not so much on art, because the art direction here is super, super strong, so I don't have to worry too much about that. And we have super skilled writers and good musicians and all that, but somewhere it needs to come together. Right. So in the end, I'm also sort of looking at the quality of the overall game, how it comes together. So very involved with playtesting, seeing what kind of feedback comes back from the playtesting, and then making calls on, okay, we should change this, or we should add this, or we should do that, and then discuss that with the design leads, for example, and then we make adjustments. So very much involved with quality of the end product, right, steering towards that.
So you're sort of like a composer of what's going on, but you're also definitely involved in making decisions, saying we should go here, we should go there. Yeah. It sounds like. Obviously, you're not. You've also got you're sort of two colleagues you work alongside as well to make a lot of those decisions. Yeah. Can you remember any sort of instances in which you had to put your foot down and say, no, I think we really should be going with this way or that way in terms of the design of Horizon?
Yeah, there have been quite a few discussions during the development, and I think one of the bigger ones was some decisions on the size of the map for Horizon. There was an idea at some point from the art team that the map was so big, and it was like 50 times bigger than what we ended up with. Right. So just some calculations showed that we would never be able to fill that with enough content, and we had already been, by creating these playable prototypes and small experiences, we already knew what kind of pacing we needed, and after each like 200 meters we needed an event or an activity or something else, so we had certain measurements, we figured that out, a certain grid with density and pacing. To map that on a world that's 50 times bigger than what we currently have was completely impossible. Right. So that is an area where we had to dial it back drastically, and we scaled down the map a number of times. We kept halving it more or less to what we have now. And
then presumably that becomes another problem where you're saying like, okay, how do we make it still look big? How do we give it that false perspective?
Yes, yes. So that was the big challenge for the art team then, to figure that out together with the tech guys. Right. How can we create these epic vistas? And the map that we ended up with is still not small. It's still a fairly big map. So, right, but compared to the initial idea, it's a huge difference. Yeah. And there were a lot more discussions at the start of the project. Probably some of the other colleagues will probably have already discussed, mentioned it. But we had at some point collected so many discussion points that I thought of an idea which we called sliders, where we put an ID represented as a slider, and you could slide it to the left or to the right with the two different opinions on that specific topic. And then we had a meeting outside of the office, sort of a neutral place, where the heads of the project back then sat down together and discussed every topic, and it was a number of pages, and every page was filled with these sliders. Right. And yeah, we would say, how dangerous are the machines? Does alloy steel? All those kind of questions. And we went through that and discussed where the sliders should be. So there was a very good process, because on one hand it was like collaborative. It was with the team leads together, so everybody understood the decisions. We actually made decisions. That was also a good point.
Right.
Because afterwards we could move on. We covered like 4 pages filled with sliders, so lots and lots of decisions were made. The way I always see that is that you're kind of like in some sort of a sinus wave. You're going left and right in this cone, but you're trying to slowly go to that end point where everything comes together. But it's on one hand it's good that you go left and right and go quite wide, that you explore different options. So in the beginning I think that's it's only for the better to explore lots of options and ideas and just to see if something works and sticks or not. But at some point you have to narrow down and cut the things that really don't fit. And sometimes we went too far to the side where it really didn't make any sense anymore. We just had to cut it. Right. But it is it's always a challenge. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the different directions the art department went in, especially in relation to making the sort of more animalistic style enemies and stuff like that. But I kind of want to talk to you about like how the open world changed from the one we see right now, because it seems like a world that has like a very strong main quest, and then it just seems like a very well designed open world, which I think surprised a lot of people because it was a studio that hadn't necessarily explored that genre before. How difficult was it to figure out what the like pacing and the quests and the activities that you would do to like refine that? Was that, I imagine that was quite a long process. Figuring that out was a long process, and also because at the same time the art team wants to build the world. So on one hand designers want to figure out sort of the flow and how you progress through the world, but what does the world actually look like? What kind of components does it have? How high are the mountains? Where are the valleys? Where are the rivers? And especially because our game is taking place in an actual place in the US. Right. We have to stick to certain things as well artistically, because otherwise it doesn't match up anymore. So there's that restriction as well. So this is really a process where we just keep combining things and keep changing them. So the art comes with an update, and design adds and adjusts, and so we keep going through cycles and keep changing it. And one thing that we figured out in the beginning is that we wanted to have sort of a staged unlocking of the world, that we didn't want to overwhelm players immediately and throw them into the big open world. So the first couple of quests are more linear and more traditional and a bit more hand-holding, and this works great kind of to tell the story, to set up the story, but also to tutorialize the mechanics, because we knew that our mechanics, fighting with the machines, etc., can be quite challenging if you're just thrown into it, because we wanted to make a dangerous world, so that kind of makes sense. But after those two first more linear quests, we go into a small pocket, a mini open world. After that it unlocks into a medium-sized open world, and afterwards it unlocks into the full open world. So this staged approach helped us as developers, because we could design these kind of pockets sequentially. Right. We could play test them sequentially in a way as the world became bigger. And it helps players also to not be overwhelmed and to be gradually introduced into all these components. So it kind of happened naturally, but at the same time it's maybe also something we learn from the Killzone games, how we make our games and how we start and how we do production. I've got 2 questions about that. The first is, did you design it then chronologically in the order that we now play it? Like, did you start with, yes, the sort of Nora area and then...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We had people sometimes working also on the other areas. Maybe art was going ahead and already doing at the big city.
Meridian?
Meridian, yeah, we have a different name internally, so I always need to think what is the final name again.
You talk to me about what we've had.
Mesa City.
Mesa City?
Yeah.
Black Mesa City?
Yes.
It's like com giraffes we've heard a lot about in the past couple of days.
Com giraffes, yeah. Scouts.
Right, yeah, scouts as well.
And raptors.
Yeah, a lot of raptors.
Yeah. But we had an artist for a long time working on Meridian. Probably for 6 years or something. So there were multiple things in parallel in production, but we had the Embrace, that initial area. That was kind of our first playable area as well.
Right. And then the other question about that is, it seems that open world design has kind of come full circle, because that's kind of how, like, you know, I don't know if it's open world, but like the first large scale world to me is like something like Grand Theft Auto 3, which was very much like 1 island, 2 island, 3 island. And then you look at like more modern sort of Ubisoft games, where they used to be Assassin's Creed would be in a small area and then get big, but like you play Watch Dogs 2 now, you can fucking go everywhere you want, right? But then, like for instance, CD Projekt with The Witcher 3, similar to what you guys did here, where you had this cloistered little world. Were you ever worried that like sometimes players might get frustrated that like, I just want to explore this world, but you're making me go through, especially the start, because it's so linear and story based?
Oh yeah,
Was
absolutely.
that ever a worry?
Yeah, absolutely. We had one version of the story at some point. We didn't have that third main quest where we had a bit of the open world. So we came up, we noticed that issue. We were telling too much story. There was too much cinematics in a row. Too little gameplay. It took too long for the player to actually fight machines. So we pulled that. We kind of came up with that third quest where you have multiple objectives. Go to the trader and fight. Get the resources from the machines. So that was specifically designed and injected into the story to get players really playing the game and getting the first taste for the more free-form, open-world gameplay. Yeah.
John said that one of the elements of the story that he didn't want, well, that he wanted to retain at the start, was that at one stage, Aloy got the focus when she was an adult, not when she was a child, and that he wanted to keep it as when she was an adult, but ultimately, everyone said like we can't have no interface on the game for like 3 hours or something. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, there was quite a few challenges with this whole focus ID because of that. Indeed, like we weren't sure for a long time how much interface we would be displaying with the focus, because we had indeed, when do we introduce the focus? If you get it too late, we don't have an interface. Right. But also, if the focus is taken away or destroyed through the story at some point in the game, do we take away the interface from the player? That's not nice. Right. So that has been a balance. Had been a discussion for quite a while, right, to figure that out.
There's a lot of elements like that that you look at and you go, I wonder how they landed at that point. Like for instance, crafting arrows. Like I can imagine there's a whole thing where you're like trying to get, well, I mean, you get Ridgewood and you do all that. But what I love about the game is I can just go in the menu, hold X for like 10 minutes and 40 hours appear. Was that ever a different system, or was it always that quick?
The quick craft while on the run, kind of with the wheel, that quick craft, that is an idea we had quite early on. But it has taken some years to kind of perfect that and to get it really smooth, and because we had to figure out how many divisions do you actually have on the wheel, so it still feels you can diagonally or quickly make a decision. Do we have to slow down the game while you're doing this? All those kind of things. Visually, what does it look like? So it's very clear to read it. But being able to quick craft while in combat, that always felt like a really cool thing to do. Not having to pause the game, go into a menu and then come back to really break that kind of the flow. But it took a while, to get at where it is.
I want to talk to you a little bit about audio design as well, because it's the audio in this game is very striking. I mean, the music is wonderful as well, but like especially some of the machine sounds as well. Like, where do you start with that? Because making machine sounds, the machine sounds in this game sound incredibly unique. They don't sound like robots, I guess. But also you're trying to communicate to the player what's going on, like the different signals. Is there a lot of like signaling happening in the audio that like players mightn't even pick up on?
Yeah, there is a lot going on there. I think the best test that we ever did on this was with the Watcher. Our goal was that you could, by not looking at the enemy, you could tell what it was doing and where it was, by hearing. So you would hear if it was searching, if it found something, if it was going into combat, if it was about to attack. So all of these stages, all of these behaviors that are important for the player, we wanted the player to only by audio to be able to know what was going on. Right. So that helps. If once we got that sort of working, that helped enormously with some of these enemies that might not be in your view. You could still hear what they're doing. And I think players, maybe not consciously, but I think they at some point will learn with specific sounds of machines what's going on, and if they need to run or dodge or do something else. Yeah.
Was there ever any more, one of the other elements I find fascinating, we've talked to some people about, is the whole idea that it is that post-apocalypse, that it is in a real world place, but it doesn't, a lot of the time it doesn't necessarily feel like, for instance, a Fallout game where it's still very connected to what that place was. Like you don't see big highways, or you don't see like a Nevada sign or anything like that. Was it difficult to strike that balance to try and create a world that felt like its own place rather than sort of derivative of a place that we know?
Yeah, I think since the beginning we always try to keep that like a nicety for the players if they would recognize it.
Right.
But it was never like a very important big thing. I think the more important thing was that we wanted to make players feel like this once was your world, but it's now 1,000 years in the future. It's overgrown. Machines are the dominant species and there's tribes. So that was the most important stuff to get across to the player. And then the story that we tell, of course, with Aloy and her connection to the past and her role. But yeah, the actual locations was kind of an extra nice thing to have.
Right.
Yeah.
Another part of open world design, which I think people are very interested in, is the idea of having points of interest and guiding the player's eye line and letting them know where they should go. Obviously that's new to somebody who's been making linear first-person shooters. I mean, there's tricks to use in those as well, I'm sure, with lighting and whatnot to let people know where they should go. But that's probably quite a complex thing to figure out, right? Like having it sort of wherever a player is, they have a couple of options.
Yeah, well, one thing is that from our early prototypes, we learned that we should designing things on a certain grid with 200-meter intervals. That was kind of the conclusion, because then with our player speed, we sort of figured out that was nice pacing. So based with that grid, we kind of placed the different activities or the different landmarks or the settlements or the merchants. We placed them, dotted them around on the map. Basically from above you just kind of drop them on the map. And then we started walking through it and figuring out, okay, what can you see? Maybe this guy needs to be lifted, or this village, the road needs to be cleared. There's too many trees in the way. So we constantly basically walk through it and watch from all angles by playing and seeing if things are visible. And that is, I don't think that's hard in itself, but yeah, everybody in the team needs to cooperate there, because if somebody isn't aware and suddenly there's this whole, I don't know, a boulder or another rock emerging right in front of this merchant and you don't see him anymore. So yeah, that's why I think it's good that people in the team also play the game and they know, what we're making.
And then if the environment team does another, world bake, and then there's a new version of the world, is that kind of, you're like, oh shit, we need to like move everything around?
That happened, yeah. So that's a technical process, I think, where we need to improve a bit, yeah. Yeah, when there's new bakes and the terrain changes and shift heights and those kind of things, that design sort of automatically is adjusted and fixed and falls back onto the ground again in the right place.
Is there there's obviously lots of stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor. Is there anything that stands out to you in terms of how the world worked, or activities that didn't make it in, or mechanisms? One thing we heard was that there was a stamina system for the robots, but it didn't ever really matter because you had to run for like 3 minutes before before it kicked in. Was there any other like things like that didn't make it in, just didn't work?
There are a number of things that we might save to a later date, right? But there was one thing quite big as a feature, actually. So this was in the beginning when we started our first prototyping, just to get a feel for what the world would be and how hunting machines would work. We thought, like, okay, if you kill a big machine, what do you do with the components? And we thought, okay, you can't just let the machine be there on the ground. You need all the components. You want to salvage everything it has. But it was too much for Aloy to carry the entire machine, like a Thunderjaw or something. So we thought, okay, maybe she can shoot flares, and when she shoots the flares up, a flare up, then a tribe that's nearby comes flying in, with this giant flying wheel machine is what we created, like almost like a flying wheel pirate ship.
Right. Yeah.
And they, with ropes, they climb down, they tie it to the machine, lift it, bring it to the city, and then you can collect your resources there, or the guy from the ship drops some coins down, and you can catch it. But it was also complicated. We had this in a cinematic at some point, but having to do this every time you kill a big machine didn't make much sense. So we had a number of these kind of moments where things were just becoming too big and kind of almost ridiculous, and it also didn't look very plausible as well.
It sounds like a post-apocalyptic Fulton, like in Metal Gear Solid 5.
It was that, yeah.
Fast travel is always an interesting challenge in any open world game. Did you guys always know that you were going to have sort of like the campsites? Because it's really elegant. Like it makes sense. She's exploring the world and then she's like having a rest and finding a campsite and then moving along. But did that have different iterations?
Yeah, I think the tricky thing with the campfires was because we wanted the world to feel dangerous. For a long time we didn't know how many campfires we actually needed. And it was also internally, some designers, they like their games to be very hard. So they didn't like that we had as many campfires as we have. But some people were really happy with it. So you have these kind of different opinions, and that's sometimes hard also from playtests to know exactly what is enough or what is not enough. But we've just, throughout production, we just kept fine-tuning them also where they are. And then fast traveling, yeah. At some point we had in the interface, we had built something where there was like a jet flying over the map, like in Indiana Jones. You would see Aloys kind of fly over the map to where you were fast traveling. Okay. But in playtest, what we saw was that people thought that it took way too long to travel there. It wasn't fast travel. That was the main complaint. It wasn't fast. It was travel, but it wasn't fast. So we completely ditched that and had the loading hints, which also helped. If you now load and fast travel, you get the hints that help with your progression or to highlight certain features. And that system we actually fine-tuned so that based on what killed you or something, they would dynamically adjust. So that opened up new possibilities instead of this plane flying over the world.
That's funny. So it was like a map, and it was just like. That's so funny that then people thought it was like it was going too slow.
Yeah. Well, there was also a technical problem that sometimes that plane or icon would already arrive at the place, but the game wasn't done loading yet because it wasn't properly calculated. So it would still hang as you would be on the destination, but the game would kind of hang there.
She's waiting for
people were waiting
in the arrivals department. That's amazing. What was one of the biggest challenges of just making this game? Something like the combat stands out, or the design of the robot, the machine. Sorry. But what was it? Was it making the world? Was it the combat? What was one of the hardest things about making this game?
I think we were fortunate to have this much time, mostly figuring out kind of lots of important things like Aloy. Who is Aloy? What is her personality? What is her story? How old is she? What does she look like? All this stuff just took a lot of time to figure out. But also, the same thing is for the combat. The unique component of this concept was, of course, these machines in terms of gameplay, but we didn't know how you would fight with these. So, looking at the horizon might feel like we already knew exactly that combat would be like this because that's what it is. But that wasn't a straightforward thing that we just ended up there. There was a lot of experimentation and cutting and adding and changing and simplifying in a lot of cases as well to get what we have now in the game. So the combat I think took maybe till 2015 somewhere. So a year and a half before we shipped is when we first saw, okay, this combat is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah. It's incredible how long, how close to the end seemingly a lot of this stuff comes together.
Yeah, and if I look back at the schedule, Shadowfall released at the end of 2013. In 2014, we didn't get full team from Shadowfall on Horizon yet, so we were still with a fairly small team. So it was kind of a gradual onboarding, which was nice in itself. So more or less towards the end of 2014, we had the entire team. And then we had 2 years, basically. It was 2015 and 16 that we made Horizon.
Right.
So it's only in 2 years that we really made the game. So looking back at that, I think it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Because the rest was all prototyping and testing and trying ideas, but it was not actually building the game yet.
Yeah. Building your tools and figuring out story.
The engine, getting the engine ready. Yeah.
So, because John came on, it sounds like pre-production had been going on for quite a while, or maybe the ideation process and all that sort of stuff. So when he came in and started figuring out the sort of how the story and helping you guys with the narrative of it, did a lot of stuff have to change, or did he come at the right time for implementation?
I think we should have hired them a little bit earlier. Yeah, I think we had some ideas for the story, but we were not writers.
Right.
And having somebody like John Gonzalez on board, that was really amazing that he wanted to join our studio basically and work on Horizon. But yeah, he made immediately such a big impact on just taking inventory of what we already came up with. A lot of it he threw out of the window, and he basically wrote a new story. And we went through a number of iterations on that story as well to really fine-tune it. And yeah, it's I think that took about half a year to get the story from when he joined to when we thought, okay, this story, we like this story, this is what we're going to make.
Right.
So.
Can I talk about the first couple of hours of the game? Because in one way it's quite a long tutorial, but in lots of ways it's actually not. They're not really tutorials. They're the game. You never feel like you're in a tutorial. You just feel like you're sort of like, well, you're learning like she's learning. Did it always look like that? Because it's a really elegant like execution or a way to solve a very difficult problem, which is players helping in tutorials, but you need to fucking teach them. So did it always look like that? Or was it similar-ish to that? I'm sure it looked
Yeah, it was. I think a huge question for us was like, was the opening and that first bit of gameplay, wasn't it too slow? Were players maybe not going to be bored too soon or something like that? That was a little bit of a worry. But at the same time, we also felt like there was we noticed there was some confidence in how we built this and how we showed this and how we took player basically through this magical world, and then with Rost, and then teaching the beginnings of the hunting and slowly immersing them into this world. So yeah, we had some when we play tested. Sometimes we had to drop players in the middle of the game, and we built a specific tutorial setup for those tests, and players would go through that and then learn the basics of the game. But that felt always so gamey that it was never really an option to kind of pick that and put it in front of the game, in front of the story. So I'm quite happy that we stuck to the to the story as John had written it. Right. And fine-tuned it and integrated the gameplay in sort of hopefully as seamless as possible. Yeah.
And that seems to continue throughout the game. It's the idea that you are, as Aloy, discovering everything. It's not, you're not a protagonist who understands this world. She's kind of as ignorant to it as you are as well. Yeah. Was that always the case, that this is like a journey of discovery for her? And
that was the big idea. Yeah. That the player would feel connected to her, because both kind of fresh eyes on this new territory, these new lands he has never visited. A lot of the mysteries, he has no idea what she's doing and what's going on.
It sounded a lot with early on, or at least with that initial sort of Thunderjaw creation, people were saying that there was a lot more components, a lot more types of resource canisters. Thank you. Yeah. How did you refine it down? How did you figure out that, like, okay, there's too much going on here, we need to like trim it down?
At some point with the combat we had so many hidden meters inside the machines. And all the different machines had different meters, and they had stamina, and they had I don't know what, they got tired from running at some point, and there were so many systems at play that we but when playing, we didn't know ourselves exactly how to fight these machines.
Right.
So that was kind of a moment where we said, okay, let's dial it back and let's look at the bigger things. What is the most interesting and what is simpler for players to understand and what is fun to do? And that is shooting things off machines, like shooting the plates and taking away armor. That's something players can intuitively understand, and it's nice to break things. That's always nice feedback when you shoot something and something breaks off. So then we thought, okay, we have these. Let's put a bigger emphasis on the components. Let's do more with those. So you can pop the canister of the halves grazer, I think it's called, yeah. You can pop the canister out. You can see it flying off. It has an extra spring in it, so visually it looks nice and it feels good. And then we thought, okay, there's blaze in there. What if you shoot a fire arrow in it? Then the machine explodes. But what if other blaze canisters also get caught by that same explosion, or other grazers also get caught, so it's like a domino and it's more collateral damage effect. So when we figured that out, that those components had so much potential, that's when we cut a lot of the other hidden meter systems that we had and simplified it and dialed it back to that. In combination with the focus that can scan for weakness and strengths on the machines. And then, yeah. And so the idea was still that the bigger machines would have more components, but smaller stuff like the watcher. Right. You have the eye and you have the armor plating, but it's primarily the eye that you want to shoot to quickly take it out. And for a long time, it took maybe 5 or 6 arrows to take the watcher out. Right. And internally, we were also not feeling like, okay, this is the first machine and already it takes this many arrows to take it out. So then we made it a one-hit kill, and it is up to the player to have the skill to be able to shoot exactly in that eye. And that's already enough for an introduction enemy. Right. So that was a constant balance, like what is too hard, what is fun, for all these machines, and where they appear in the game.
One of those elements seems to be the idea that you can like whistle for them to come over as well, and only one comes as opposed to like 20 of them. That was another way to make it a little bit easier, at least on certain enemies?
Yeah, that's also a system that we played around with quite a lot, like how many machines should come, which one, how do you direct the whistle basically, which machine is coming over. Yeah. What
about humans then? Because you fight a lot of humans as well. Did you feel like you needed, because it's a different like challenge entirely, right? There's like far more of them working maybe as a group. Was that? Did you lean on your experience from Killzone games in that respect, or was that very different as well due to the nature of the maps?
Well, at some point we had only machines as enemies in the game. We didn't have humans at all, and we were noticing that there was sort of somewhere a bit of a lack of variety. Always fighting these very dangerous, aggressive metal machines. Wasn't fulfilling enough for some reason, and we also saw that reflected in playtest reports where people said they were missing something. So that's why we introduced the fighting with the bandit camps, with those pockets, also to explain that world a little bit better. Like, not everybody is friendly and living in tribes, etc., in these peaceful settlements, but there's also still some bad guys around here. And also, as an activity, it can be nice to be doing something else instead of just shooting machines. Right. And there was a lot from the Killzone games indeed that we kind of knew how to do, like designing these spaces where these bandits would roam around. It was still challenging in a way because now these guys are shooting arrows. Right. Also, how important was the human combat and in comparison to the machine combat, because the machine combat was still the more original thing that we really wanted to shine. So that has been a bit of a trade-off as well. Yeah.
And then the Tallnecks as well. They changed quite a lot. We hear were you always climbing them? We heard at one stage you were murdering them, but maybe it didn't feel so good. Murdering might be the wrong word. Hunting.
Yeah, the hunting machines has always been. It's not just specifically for the Tallneck. We were always kind of wondering how does Aloy actually feel about killing these majestic, nice, animalistic machines. but it is the game. It is the gameplay, a part of the gameplay that you actually hunt these machines. So it can't feel too bad. That's why the animations, we also didn't take them too far in terms of the player empathizing with them or sympathizing or something, with feeling empathy for them. The Tallnecks have a sort of movement and graciousness, maybe like giraffes or something, that for some people, they find it harder to justify shooting them. I personally don't have a problem with it, but some people in the team don't like that. So yeah, we opted for a non-destructible version. That is climbable, and I think that's still the cool thing, that when you finally get on top of the disc, that you have this amazing view and it's still walking around, and time of day you can change, weather can change, so you have these nice extra effects. So I think they still work, but yeah.
Did you always have like towers, like the idea that you would get to the top of something and then see things, like unlock things on the map? Because that's something we're used to in a lot of open world games, but this is a very elegant situation,
Yeah, of course we are aware of the of where this comes from, from other games. But what we just really liked is that these Tallnecks, they have these dishes. They are sort of the communication establishing guys with the other machines. So it kind of makes sense that you climb on them and get information, extract data from them where the other machines are, and by that uncover part of the map. So it just felt like such a logical thing to do, that we didn't care that much about what other games already did before us.
Excellent. Cauldron Design then, very, very different to the open world in terms of, it's more linear, artistically very different as well, very dark. Did they always sort of look that way, or was that a big challenge, the idea of like not only creating those spaces, but also creating like, spaces to fight big robots in them as well?
Yeah, the Cauldrons, so this is one of the more unique bits for Horizon as well, where sort of the answering the question, where could the machines come from? So we had the idea always that it would be very nice if we had sort of dungeons, or like you have this beautiful, you have the beautiful nature kind of upstairs or above ground, but what if there's this layer underneath that you can't see, you don't know anything about? And then we thought, okay, let's combine the two. What if the machines are built underground in these, what we eventually called cauldrons? You could see a bit of how they're created, but they could also be very cool spaces for players to explore and to fight the machines there as well. And it was quite challenging to get these cauldrons look as good and as they do, also because technically they're super heavy in terms of memory and streaming and all that stuff, and we didn't want loading screens. We wanted to have them seamlessly blend. So you go from the beautiful nature and you go into the cauldron, and you have this completely different atmosphere without intrusions of loading screens or anything like that. To feel the delta between the two.
That's interesting, because like, why is it so important that there are absolutely no loading screens? Because you could imagine, going through a pass in a mountain, and then it's like, that's where it happens, or you could like the cauldrons could have been instanced, right? You could imagine. We were talking to some of the design team about how they'd, sometimes accidentally be pulling from the memory of a cauldron because it's like above a campsite or something. Why did it matter so much that there was no loading screens whatsoever? What is it about that that's like fundamentally important?
It's very intrusive when that happens. We have for the mount, and it very, very rarely still happens, I think, in the game. If you're driving too fast, then the streaming system can't keep up, and you very briefly get a loading screen interruption, and it's just immersion breaking, I think. And that's for a lot of things. When I review the game, when I play it, I'm always very sensitive to anything that breaks immersion, because that pulls you out of the experience, and this is just part of that as well.
Very difficult, I imagine, to do, to create a world where there are no loading screens. Is that all down to that streaming system and
yes.
the rendering system and stuff?
Yeah, it is. And design-wise, we have to, for example, the mounts cannot be exceeding a certain speed. The player cannot be exceeding a certain speed, because otherwise the systems can't keep up with the streaming. They could make that faster, but then the art fidelity goes down a bit, for example. So that's a trade-off. The ropecaster idea, I think it's, if you just think about hunting big machines, what do you bring to the fight? I always kept thinking about like harpooning whales, for example.
Right.
That's with a big ass harpoon and with a rope, and then they're pulled in. So I think that's probably where the ropecaster came from. Like, you can shoot and you can anchor, you can tie them down. And we also had concept images at some point where the Viz team had been drawing big machines like the Tallneck being tied down by tribal hunters.
Right.
So yeah, it's a kind of that combination where I think it's also a nice different kind of mechanic. Instead of just shooting arrows or throwing grenades or something like that, to be more tactical, to place the tripwires or to tie a machine down while you can fight something else. So that's a nice element to the tactical gameplay.
Was there ever any stage where you were hunting with other people? Because tribal hunting is obviously that's kind of where my brain goes sometimes when I think about prehistoric man. Or was the idea that she was just an incredible hunter and could do it on her own?
There have been early concepts where we had, there have been discussions at the beginning also where we were thinking about 2 players,
right,
and a co-op player even. Our very early prototypes was with 2 players. We had the game running back then in co-op, and that was quite nice to see. But we had to cut that because the programmers basically said, if you want to have co-op, you're gonna have 50% of the features that you're asking for,
right,
and not 100%.
Yeah.
And as it being the first game, we thought, okay, we want 100%.
Yeah.
So we dropped co-op in favor of that. And the NPCs fighting along, that is very complicated to get that right, and we didn't want to go there for this game because it's just so much work to do that well. What we wanted to do design-wise from the very beginning is to not lock players into a specific playstyle, but to let them, just give them a wide array of options, so they have the freedom to basically develop their character in whatever direction and in whatever order they wanted. So that sense of player freedom was sort of the top priority. And then actually coming up with the structure of the skill tree and which skills we implemented, that was a very long process. That took us like 2 years or something to figure that out. And how to, which skills should sit, how much it should cost and all that stuff.
We talked to everyone, I usually ask this question right at the end because it's fitting. We talked to a lot of people about how they played the game for years and they iterated on it for years, and then when the game comes out, do they actually get a chance to sit down and play it? And it's always surprising to us. It's not surprising anymore. It was surprising at the start that most people used to say, I still haven't played it. Especially you, considering so much of your job, ideally 50% of your day was actually playing different iterations of it. When the game is out, do you get to just like sit down with a cup of coffee and enjoy it, or is it too hard?
I don't think you will find my answer very surprising. No, the thing is that we, in 2016, for example, we play tested every month. Right. With we call these appeals tests, and we get the score from actual gamers that play the game. Right. Plus, we have a nice milestone to work towards too, so that works really well for us. But I also need to know exactly what's in those builds. So I also play those builds from front to back, and so I know exactly what's in there. So every month I play the full game, basically, of how much we have. And then in between the playtests as well. So I play the game a lot before it released in that sense. And when it released, indeed, I also needed to take a bit of time away from the game and also to be able to step away from it and to see and feel what we actually created. Because you're so deep in the trenches and you're so much in with your mind set on to fixing and improving things. It's very hard to let that kind of attitude or that way of working to let that go. Right. So I could boot the game the day it releases or the week after it releases, but I would still be trying to find bugs or issues or trying to find improvements. And that's why I wait like a number of months so I can play it as a game as I would play other games, and that's still very hard, to be honest. But
how do you feel about it now after working on it for so long and having the critical response and the fan response and all of these cosplayers and people just making art and stuff? You must be incredibly proud.
Yeah, it's a bit surreal, I think, in a way. Yeah, it's the same thing I think happened with Killzone 2. Also, what we achieved there, it took a while before that actually sunk in, and before I realized what we built and how much people were liking it. But it's incredibly motivating, of course, to see this response, and gives a lot of energy to start on a new adventure.
Are you sick of making open world games, or?
Oh no, no.